So I think the best way to look at this trial in New York with the conviction of Trump is to look at it in three levels, and each of these levels threshold would have to be met before you would justify a sort of conviction like this. Now, the first level is asking, was this a political prosecution? And there's two ways to look at this really. First, the bias of the judge, the prosecution, etc. Does this seem like something that was brought because Donald Trump is running for president or he was the former president or opposition to the party that's in charge now? I would say yes, it seems like that. And the second level of this is this the sort of crime, which is basically a paperwork error that was a misdemeanor, that we're going to use for the first time in history to convict a former president of something as serious as a felony? Clearly, this is a charge that should not be the first one that you ever see, particularly with the legal theories that we'll talk about as how they stretched it. So it seems evident to me, given that this was such a low level crime that they searched and searched for, went past the statute of limitations, and when you factor in the bias and the attacks on Trump with lawfare that he suffered over and over again, that this was a political prosecution. But if you get through that and you say you don't think it was, which I think is evident, then you get to the second level, and that is the legal theories that they used to charge Trump justified? And I would say no, because it's difficult to explain, but it required three steps. There is the felony falsification of paperwork, which requires a separate crime to have been committed, which is basically conspiracy to affect an election by unlawful means, which requires a third crime to have been committed, which is that unlawful means. And those unlawful means basically boil down to tax crimes, which don't really make sense. And it all boils down to basically federal election violations. The problem is, there's questions as to whether or not a state government can even indict or charge for a federal issue like this. And beyond that, why is making a non-disclosure agreement a federal election campaign expenditure? It makes no sense. So when you look at the legal theories, once more, I believe they fail, and this case should have never been brought. There are all sorts of other questions, such as, was due process violated? Was the jury instructions violation of due process and other legal rights that Donald Trump had? Those things will all have to be discussed. But if you get through that, then there's the third level, which is, even if we accept that this wasn't a political prosecution, and we accept that this is a sound legal theory with no due process violations, was Trump actually guilty? It's difficult to say because they wouldn't allow cameras in the courtroom, and so you have to read through 4,000 pages of a transcript to figure out. But it looks evident that Donald Trump wasn't the person who concocted this scheme. It was Michael Cohen. In fact, he actually stole $60,000 for Trump. They're so desperate, they're saying he committed tax fraud violations by paying more in taxes. So each of these parts have a lot you could talk about, but I think it's evident you have to get through all three of those to support a conviction, and they don't get through any.